I'm writing this from an old dusty computer. I don't even know if this will work, but since I'm down here for the rest of my life, I might as well make use of my free time. There's no signal, no Wi-Fi, no internet browser I can find, just a black terminal window with a blinking green cursor. And somehow, Reddit is the only site I can access. Don't ask me how. If I had to guess, it's part of the design. This place is called the Witness Room. That's not official, it's just what I started calling it after I figured out what it does. If you've read this far and this actually posts, then I guess the room wants you to see this. I didn't fall into a portal. I didn't get abducted by aliens. I wasn't sleepwalking or drugged or anything else that makes this easier to explain. I was just at home, sitting on the floor, staring at the wall, thinking about how I hadn't done anything useful with my life. And then I blinked, and I was here. There was one door, don't ask, I've already tried everything to open it. No windows, no bed, no toilet. Just concrete walls, stale air, a massive black screen embedded in the wall in front of a single plastic chair, and a metal desk with a computer in front of it. No lights I could see, but the room was dimly lit anyway. It's always the same level of light, no matter how long I wait. No shadows, just a dull, gray atmosphere, like the inside of a mausoleum. The screen turned on by itself, and it showed me. Not just me standing there, but me before from moments in my life. A camera angle over my shoulder at my 10th birthday party. A shot from my college dorm window, zoomed in through the blinds. One clip was from inside my own living room, showing me watching TV last week. I never noticed the camera, because there wasn't one. And then the screen started showing people. People watching me. Not metaphorically, literally. In every clip, there's someone watching. Sometimes it's obvious. A man staring at me from a coffee shop booth across the street. A woman in an elevator pretending to scroll through her phone. Other times, it's subtle, just a figure in the background of a reflection. A shadow under the bed that doesn't belong to anyone. At first, I thought I had absolutely lost my mind or fell asleep and ended up in a nightmare. But I have been here a long time. I don't know how long, but definitely years. The screen showed me things that could not have been coincidences. A moment when I was 9, playing in my backyard, and someone was standing behind our shed, just staring. A moment when I had to have been no more than 3, playing in a sandbox. A moment when I was graduating high school. The moment I got divorced. The moment I lost my child. It never stopped, it just kept going, showing me more clips, years and years of moments when I was being watched and never knew it. And now, I think I'm the one watching. If you're wondering how I eat, sleep, or use the bathroom, the quick answer is I don't. I don't need to. Maybe I died and this is some kind of hell, or maybe I died and I'm some type of guardian angel. Either way doesn't matter. From what I've come to understand, this room operates on some kind of cycle. The ones who are watched become the watchers. It doesn't ask for consent or offer a way out. You don't get a warning. One day, you're the subject. The next, you're the observer. I haven't found any purpose to it. It's not like I can intervene. I can't stop accidents. I can't whisper good luck into someone's ear. I just sit here, watching. Always watching. That's the only function I've discovered so far. It took forever for the screen to stop showing me my life. Clip after clip of moments I forgot about or wished I'd never remembered. And then, finally, it switched. I guess I've been assigned to someone now. It's a baby. A girl. Maybe a few months old. I don't know how or why, but she's the one I see now. Her crib, her parents feeding her, blurry snippets of their home. I know this sounds messed up, but as a man, I don't feel right about it. It's not my place to be watching a little girl grow up. It makes my skin crawl, even if I have no control over it. But I don't think this room cares much about how I feel. Luckily, I've figured out that I can choose when to watch. It's not a button or a switch, more like a mental prompt. If I let my thoughts drift too long in her direction, the screen pulls her up. I don't know what happens if I ignore her for too long. I haven't tested that yet. I'm not sure I want to. Sometimes I look away for days at a time, afraid of what I might see. Other times I sit there for hours, just watching her grow. But lately something's changed. She looks at me now. Not at the screen. At me. Like she knows I'm here. A few days ago, she reached her hand out and waved. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. I waved back. Instinct, maybe. Then yesterday she held up a piece of paper, a drawing. It was me, sitting in this chair. Same hair, same face, same shadow under my eyes, same room. After she showed me the drawing, I shut the screen off. Well, I just thought about nothing for a while. Sat in the chair, stared at the wall, thought maybe I was losing it. More than I already have. But when I turned the screen back on, she was gone. Her room was empty. Her family, her mother, they were all still there. Just no sign of her, like she'd never existed. I waited. Hours passed. Nothing. Then the feed changed. I didn't touch anything, didn't think anything. It just switched, like something in the room decided I'd had my turn. Now I was watching something else. A new screen, a new room. A man sitting in the same chair I'm in now. Same walls, same humming. Except he was older, maybe late 50s. Balding. He looked tired, like he'd been in here forever. He was watching someone. A kid. A younger version of me. The man leaned closer to his screen, and for a split second I saw it, his reflection. His eyes weren't right. Too wide, too glassy. Like he was trapped inside himself, watching something else watching him. The feed flickered, and suddenly it wasn't his screen anymore. It was a recording of me, my childhood, again. But this time, it wasn't how I remembered it. There was a birthday party I never had, a dog I never owned, a man standing at the edge of the backyard I'd never seen before, wearing a watch I now realize looks exactly like the one I'm wearing now. My whole body went cold. Because if this was a memory, why was I in it, watching myself, years before I ever entered this room? The screen cut to black. This next part of my journey was written later on a different device. Sorry if it sucks. And then the door behind me unlocked for the first time. I rose, almost as if on autopilot, and stepped away from the old dusty computer. The door swung open slowly, revealing a narrow hallway lit by a sparse, flickering light that danced along the concrete walls. The hum of the room was punctuated only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the soft scuff of my shoes against the cold floor. The door creaked open on its own, slowly. No breeze, no pressure, no reason it should have moved. I didn't want to go through it. I really didn't. But I also didn't want to sit in this chair another second. So I stood, knees stiff from weeks of not moving much, and stepped toward the hallway. It was pitch black beyond the doorway, but as soon as I crossed the threshold, dim lights flickered to life along the floor, one by one, leading me forward. I followed them. This hall was different from the room I came from. The walls weren't industrial metal anymore. They were smooth, painted, beige, like a government building or a hospital from the 90s. I passed doors on either side, all closed. Each one had a small glass window. Why didn't I have one of these? I peeked into one of them and saw someone sitting in front of a big screen just like mine, except they didn't have a desk or computer. My heart pounded as I backed away and bolted down the hall. One by one, I reached each glass window, and every time I peered through, I saw a similar scene. A solitary person seated before a big screen, their eyes empty yet fixated, as if in an endless trance. The occupants were different each time. A young woman with a tear-streaked face here, an older man with tired eyes there, even a child who looked very familiar. The child was her. I couldn't believe my eyes. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. What kind of sick joke was this? Why was she here? I fumbled along the door, searching for any kind of handle, anything to open it. Just as I was about to slam my body into it, the door swung open with a creak. There she was, sitting on that big chair, her small face contorted with tears. I reacted instinctively, scooping her up in my arms. She stared at me with an intensity that belied her age. Then, as if on cue, she raised a tiny hand and waved at me, just like I'd seen her do before on the screen. And then, with a voice so soft it might have been the wind, she reached up and poked my nose. "You're the drawing," she said. I held her close, trying to shake off the cold shock of those words. Just who was she? How did she know me? And most importantly, why had I been watching her for so long, only to find her here, reaching out, as if demanding I see the truth of it all? The silence in the corridor was oppressive now, every distant hum and creak a reminder of the twisted maze we were trapped in. I looked down into her eyes, searching for answers in that small, enigmatic face. There was something in her gaze, an unspoken plea, or maybe an acceptance of the fate she'd been thrust into. As I stood there, With her weight in my arms and her whispered message hanging in the air, I realized that the cycle had just become a little more personal. I wasn't just a watcher anymore. Somehow, I was meant to be a part of her story too. And with that realization, I knew there was no going back. I was in too deep now, both the watcher and the watched, bound together by a sick twist of fate that defied explanation. With her quiet, unspoken command still ringing in my ears, I took a deep breath and stepped away from the door that had brought her to me. I had to find a way out. It wasn't long before I found it, a door so massive it nearly spanned the width of the wall. My pulse drummed as I entered a massive room. The walls all around were alive with flickering screens, each one showing countless others locked in their own isolation. It was a congregation of watchers, all imprisoned in their own cycles, each one watching someone, or perhaps watching themselves. I stopped before a particularly enormous metallic door, its surface gleaming in the half-light. A strange symbol was etched into its skin, something neither ancient nor modern. Unsure if this was another trap, I hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. What I found on the other side stole my breath. A vast, ruined landscape sprawled out before us, a post-apocalyptic wasteland where crumbling skyscrapers jutted from the barren ground like broken teeth. The sky was a sickly wash of colors, illuminated by a wan, permanent twilight. It was as if the world had peeled away from its old skin, revealing a harsh, unforgiving reality beyond the sterile corridors of this building. Her small hand gripped mine tightly as I stepped through, and together we navigated shattered highways and ruined cities that whispered with the memories of a lost world. After a bit of walking, our stomachs rumbled in unison, and she began to cry. Soft, pitiful sobs. For the first time since I ended up in that room, I realized I was both hungry and tired. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on me. I had to find shelter and some sort of food for us. As we walked, every ruined structure, every deserted building told a story, a time before the endless cycle of watching began. We pressed on, desperate to find any signs of life. I paused near a crumbled wall covered in tangled ivy, the harsh remnants of the old world clinging to its surface like ghosts of memories past. I could feel the chill seep through the fabric of my jacket, and my empty stomach roiled with the gnaw of hunger. I glanced down at her, her tiny face streaked with tears, and felt a pang of responsibility and helplessness. I haven't felt such raw vulnerability in a long time. It had to have been before my daughter died that I felt anything so piercingly human. I know I'm not her father, and she isn't the daughter I lost, but as I held this little girl in my arms, those familiar aching emotions surged back with a force I hadn't expected. Maybe this whole thing is a sick twist of fate, a way for the powers that be to let me have another go at life. I wouldn't have chosen this map, but I guess I can't be too picky. Slowly, I put her down and took off my jacket, then I wrapped it around her shivering form. "I'm sorry, don't worry," I murmured more to myself than to her, my voice barely audible. We walked and walked. For how long, I couldn't even begin to guess. The girl, who I had silently started calling Mia, held my hand the whole way. She never once complained, just kept walking beside me, her small frame keeping pace with my unsteady, exhausted steps. And then finally, through the endless gray haze, it appeared. A skyscraper. It looked untouched, like whatever had leveled the rest of the world had decided to leave this one building alone. Its glass windows still glittered against the dull sky, and the structure stood tall and proud, while everything around it had decayed and rotted away. I looked down at Mia, and for the first time since all this started, she gave me a soft, tired smile. That was enough. I pulled her along as we pushed through the old revolving doors at the front entrance. Inside, voices filled the air. Quiet, normal voices, the sound of people just talking. The moment we stepped into the lobby, those voices stopped. Everyone turned to face us. A room full of strangers, dressed in casual, worn-out clothes, covered in dust and dirt, looking at us like ghosts had just walked through the door. The building itself was strange. You could tell it used to be grand. The lobby had high, arched ceilings and a wide marble staircase that stretched toward the upper floors, though the once polished stone was now dull, covered in a thin layer of gray dust. Faded gold accents clung to the edges of doorframes, tarnished and peeling. Chandeliers hung overhead, the crystals caked with grime, but still catching the faintest bit of light. It was beautiful in a sad, hollow way, like a museum of what the world used to be. Before I could process the moment, the group practically scooped us up, leading us through wide, carpeted halls into what had probably once been a conference room. A long table still sat in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs that had clearly been scavenged from around the building. Someone brought out food, something warm and surprisingly decent, and the older people in the group immediately gravitated toward Mia, doting on her like long-lost family. The rest turned to me. One of them, a man whose beard had grown wild and silver over the years, did most of the talking. They told me I'd just been through something they all knew too well. They didn't know where this place was. They didn't know why any of it existed. All they knew was the cycle, the room, the screen, the endless task of watching, of being the eyes for a world that didn't even seem to know you were there. They didn't know who built it, or who controlled it, or if anyone even did. But there was one thing they were sure of. Very few people ever got out. The ones who did somehow found their way to this building. "We try to wait for new people at the cube," the old man said, apologizing softly. "We weren't there for you today. We're sorry for that." I didn't even know how to respond, so I just nodded, listening as he explained the only rule they seemed to have. No one here asked about your old life, and no one ever asked about the things you saw while you were in the room. "You leave that part behind," he said, his voice steady but hollow. "We all do. It's the only way we get by." They gave us food, water, and finally led us upstairs to what they called the apartments. A few rooms on the upper floors had been turned into living spaces, cleaned up as best as possible. The building, surprisingly, still had electricity, still had water. The elevator even worked, and nobody could figure out why. Apparently, it always had. Food, they said, just appeared at the front doors every week. No one ever saw who delivered it or how. But there was always enough for everyone. They portioned it out and left it at each apartment door, no questions asked. Mia and I thanked them the best we could, still dazed from the whole experience, and stepped into the small apartment they'd given us. It wasn't much. A couch, a bed, an old lamp flickering in the corner. But after everything, it felt like a palace. We walked over to the window and stood there, hand in hand. The world stretched out before us like an endless graveyard, buildings reduced to skeletons, streets swallowed by nature and time. But beyond all that, far in the distance, the silver cube still sat shining cold and perfect in the sun. That place would always be there, watching, waiting. And now, so would we. Years passed and Mia are doing great. I got married to someone who came out of the cube a couple months after we did, and we are building as good as a life as we can. I even found an old computer in one of the many rooms here, and wouldn't you believe it? It works. Unfortunately, it only has Reddit and a music playlist available on it, but hey, it's entertaining enough. Anyway, thanks for reading about my journey to my new life, and if you ever find yourself in the witness room, try and get out. This new world isn't all that bad. I'll keep you updated on progress we make learning about this new world. Bye. A phone call came in with the sun and found me sleeping in a shitty hotel bed somewhere deep in the buttholes of southern New Jersey. My head hurt like hell, my stomach was about 3 seconds from turning, and I just wanted to get some rest. But motherfucking Todd couldn't help himself. The dude was like a corporate wind-up doll, born and bred in the basements of corporate America to wake up at the crack of dawn and take everybody's money. "It rained last night, right, Mike?" He coughed through a mouthful of menthol lozenges. "I heard water on the roof. And the wind. Geez, the entire building shook like the devil himself was playing maracas." My memory took a few seconds to catch up with the conversation. We'd been driving all day through the turnpikes and over endless skyline bridges that hovered high above the factories of the Northeast. We didn't arrive at the dingy little inn until sometime around 9 that night. The lights were all off. The lot was dark. It was drizzling then, at least I thought as much. Anyway, I went out for a cup of coffee this morning. The ground was bone dry. I can't figure out why. An old alarm clock buzzed next to a row of empty bottles. The television blared white static. I wasn't really listening. I couldn't even find my pants. The room bore all of the typical signs of my personal downfall. A large, empty bag of potato chips was stationed by the refrigerator, with a case of Blue Moon carefully placed beside it. The mattress was soaked with sweat and the sheets were twisted about. It looked like somebody either had an exorcism or got drunk watching reruns of family comedies. Given my history, I settled on the latter. "That's not even the weirdest part," Todd whispered. "Nobody's here. I checked the halls, the lobby, bathrooms. The entire building is empty. It's freaky." I took the comment with a grain of salt. Todd had a tendency to worry. That was actually putting it mildly. The man was a full-blown panicker. His fear of flying was the sole reason we were forced to drive 500 miles across the country, shilling shitty software to worse people who didn't care all along the way. His anxieties weren't even the worst part. It was the colossal arrogance that drove me up a wall more than anything else. He was one of those guys that seemed to take sadistic pleasure in competition with the GPS. Every wrong turn was a victory in the battle of Todd versus the technology. That was how we ended up so far off the beaten path. Some people just don't want their tribal knowledge to be lost. I bet he could have stuck that quote in his corny little PowerPoint. "Are you ready yet?" he asked. "Let's go. I don't like this place very much. Something about it gives me butterflies, and not the fun ones." As much as I hated to admit it, he wasn't totally wrong. We booked the rooms through one of those shady discount travel sites, about an hour ahead of showing up there in the first place. The building seemed modern enough. The parking lot was well lit, and the lobby was decorated with hung plasma TVs and new furniture. But when we made it to the front desk to check in, there wasn't a single person around to greet us. No clerks, no guests, nothing. Just a single sign-in sheet, a stack of faded brochures, and a rack full of keys labeled in neat, faded handwriting. We grabbed two at random. Todd shuffled toward his room, and I found the minibar in mine. After that, things got hazy. "Seriously," he snapped impatiently. "Let's go. I'll meet you in the lobby in 5 minutes." I gave it a second before I got out of bed. The nausea eased with a gulp from a plastic water bottle stashed under my pillow. The shower didn't run, and neither did the sink, so that same bottle came in handy when I needed to brush my teeth. I finished getting ready and hated on myself in the mirror a little bit. I wasn't the type to drink myself stupid. It was just a transition period. Nothing was bad. Nothing was good. I was just in a rut. At least that was the excuse. We met by the checkout desk. Nothing had changed. The lobby was quiet and untouched. Chairs were still perfectly angled around fake plants, and the same stack of brochures sat patiently collecting dust on the counter. I looked around for a bathroom that actually worked, but before I could find it, pretentious sneakers squeaked down the hallway behind me. "Welcome to scenic White Valley," Todd announced in his best radio voice. "Home of absolutely nobody." He looked way too pleased with himself for a Monday morning. His checkered polo was buttoned all the way to his chubby little neckbeard, and he wasn't wearing a tie or blazer, so it was a rare day off from the prototypical uniform. He struck me as the type of guy to read Business Insider's column on how to blend in with your people on the road. I guess the previous day's cufflinks just weren't cutting it. You could almost smell the effort in the form of Draco Noir. "Are you driving?" he sniffed. "I'm ready to take a nap." I looked around for a restroom first. The public one was on the far side of the atrium, past a row of planters and artwork in the form of abstract shapes and buzzwords. I left my bags with the human robot and made my way across the room. The floor was freshly polished, and each step clapped back off the walls with a sharp echo. Inside the bathroom was a single toilet. The tissue dispenser was empty, but the sink still worked. There wasn't a signal on my phone, and the news was a day old. None of my calls or texts were going through. That didn't seem out of the ordinary, though. There hadn't been service for miles. I finished cleaning up and stepped back out into the atrium. Something was off. Everything looked the same. The same tall windows. The same red paint and manicured furniture. But a detail had shifted. Maybe something in the air. I couldn't quite tell what. Like the whole room had been rearranged when I wasn't looking. I turned a corner, then I saw her. A woman stood beside Todd. She was older looking, with gray-streaked white hair that hung past her shoulders, and eyebrows so thick they formed a single line across her brow. Her uniform didn't match. I don't know why I noticed that first, but I did. The shirt had one logo and the hat had another. Her pants were too tight, and rolls of stretch mark-ridden skin leaned out the side of the gap in between her shirt. She didn't say anything initially, and that was the creepiest part of it all. She just sort of stared at me, like she expected something to happen. Todd kept just as still. He shot me a quick look before his eyes dropped to the floor. "Mike," he whispered when he talked. I realized then that I had never heard him be quiet about anything. "I think we better do what this woman asks." I pulled the key out of my pocket and set it on the desk. "All right, does she want us to check out?" No sooner than the words exited my mouth, a sharp screech ripped across the atrium, loud enough to force us to our knees. The tone shifted up and down in frequency. It was piercing one second, then rough the next. I couldn't figure out where it came from until something dropped behind the front desk. My attention shifted to the chalkboard. That's when I noticed the knife. "Go," the woman grunted. "Now." She dragged the blade across the board a second time. It was horrible. Todd screamed, but I couldn't hear his words. I could only see his lips move. We got back up to our feet. Then she pointed at the front door. "Go," she repeated. "Now." We got up and walked. The stranger followed. I didn't look back at her. I didn't have to. I could feel her breath hot on my shoulders. Her steps fell into an uneven echo, like her shoes didn't fit or she hadn't moved in a while. I glanced over at Todd, and his normally polished eggshell had already begun to crack. Sweat gathered on his collar and soaked through the pits of his polo. His expression looked like the features on his face had frozen somewhere between apology and panic mode. "Please," he whispered. "I don't know what we've done to offend you. Just let us leave." The knife poked gently into my back. "Go." We kept it moving. The double doors led to a courtyard in front of the building. Outside, the garden was decorated with flowers and benches. The smell of fresh mulch felt like freedom. I could see our car in the lot. There was nobody else parked there. I hoped this mystery woman, fucked as she was, would simply let us get in and drive away. Maybe she thought we were trespassing or whatever, but at least then we could put this whole knife-point encounter behind us. We marched in an awkward sort of procession, and after the first 100 steps, I was sure that we were home free. But just as Todd reached into his pocket to find his keys, the blade slashed across my peripheral vision. Fuzzy white dice fell to the ground. Bright red blood followed. "Go." We walked on. Todd limped beside me. He was quiet now. We left the parking lot behind after a few hundred feet. The manicured landscaping transitioned into a dirt path between dense trees. The forest was quiet. Branches crisscrossed overhead, low enough that we had to duck in places. The woman stayed behind us. A hill rose out of the woods with the early morning fog right above it. We reached the crest. That was when the valley opened up in earnest. "This can't be real," Todd mumbled out in front. "Does nobody work in this town?" A clearing about a mile wide spanned a gap in between the trees. Every inch of it was covered with people. There were parents with kids and folks in uniforms. There were wheelchair-bound patients in hospital gowns and beds with monitors and nurses attached. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, but not one of them said a thing. It was disturbing. They were the quietest group of people I had ever seen. Nobody coughed, nobody whispered, nobody laughed. They didn't even seem to look at each other. The only sounds were the steady movement of their feet on the dirt and the soft rustle of clothing that brushed together. A weather-beaten brown building sat at the center of the clearing. It couldn't have been taller than a couple of floors, no wider than about 100 yards. There weren't any roads that led to it. No walkways either. It looked like somebody had just taken the place and plopped it in the center of the valley. The structure itself was in rough shape. Vines crawled across the face of the faded red brick. Weeds gathered around the foundation. The roof sagged in the middle. A drain pipe dangled from the side, and the windows were stained to the point where we couldn't see through, even in the daylight. A sign over the awning read, "Library," in chipped white lettering. The woman pointed ahead, and we hustled down the hill to join the crowd. The group was packed tighter towards the front. The people seemed exhausted or angry even, like the journey had taken everything out of them. Todd tiptoed beside a burly man in pajamas. I fell into line behind a mother and her two young children. I tried to get them to look at me, the kids, the adults, anybody. I wanted to scream, but I could still feel the knife against my back, and every wrong move felt like it could cut my kidney right out of the fat. My daughter expects me to be home tonight, Todd spoke plainly through the throngs of bodies. She won't understand why I'm gone. Nobody answered him. The townsfolk were restless by this point. Arms and shoulders pressed up against my back. One lady nearly nicked her hand on the knife. A row of heavy boulders had been laid out to form a path through the field. The formation funneled the people into a tight wedge near the door, but they weren't moving. It was like they were stuck. The big man in pajamas shoved a gurney aside and forced his way to the front. He slammed on the oak exterior with his fist 3 times, in rhythm. The double door swung open, and then the crowd started to move. The whole line broke apart. Parents ditched their families, nurses abandoned their patients. The push from the back didn't stop. A few people fell down next to the rocks. One of them was an older man with white hair and a gold t-shirt ripped at the seams. He vanished beneath the weight of rushed footsteps and appeared again, face down in the dirt. "What are they doing?" I shouted over the chaos to the stranger behind us. "What the hell is this?" She glanced at me and smiled like it was obvious. "They're hungry." The crowd rushed into the building like salmon headed upstream to spawn. Dust kicked up behind them. Floorboards creaked under the weight. The stampede was over in about 10 seconds. And then it was quiet. A handful of people hadn't made it inside. Some were moving. Some, like the old man, were not. I'll never forget the look of determination on a teenager with mangled legs and a row of bloodied cuts in his face. He dragged himself toward the door, inch by inch, until a last-minute straggler shoved him back down. His skull hit a rock with a sickening crack. He didn't move after that. "Go," the woman gestured, "inside." We did what she told us. The inside of the library looked like it had been furnished by someone with a very small budget and a fond memory of the year 1997. The walls were pale green and covered in laminated newspaper clippings about science fairs and fundraisers. The chairs were upholstered in faded fabric and arranged around metal tables stacked with old magazines. An empty fish tank sat on a low shelf, but there wasn't any water, just a plastic log and a thin layer of gravel. "What the heck are we doing here?" Todd spat. "We have a right to know." The stranger tilted her knife towards a staircase tucked into the back corner of the room. She seemed more agitated than before, almost antsy. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she kept scratching her neck until the skin turned red. Her fingernails were peeled and bloodied. There was a look on her face like a crackhead hungry for a fix. "Go." The air got hotter as we climbed. The steps rose above a long and narrow hallway where the mob had already vanished from view. At the top was a plain gray door with the word storage labeled at the top. Our captor fiddled with the lock for a second. Then she poked the broad side of the blade into Todd's back. Inside. The room was small and slanted at the edges, almost like a makeshift attic office. A closet took up the far corner. 2 narrow windows let in bright sunlight that illuminated a thin strip like tape across the wood paneling. The air smelled of old carpet and moldy paper, combined with something sharp and chemical. "Stay here," the woman shouted. "No leave." And with that, the door slammed shut. A lock clicked behind it. Todd paced around the narrow space in tight circles. His breathing got heavy. He swallowed hard and pressed a hand to his chest. He looked like he was about to pass out. For a second, I thought I was going to have to catch him. "We need a way out," he babbled. "Mike, we can't stay up here. You understand that, right?" I didn't say anything back. There had to be something useful in the room, something we could use to defend ourselves or help us escape. I tried the windows, and they were rusted shut. I pressed my palm into the glass and shoved. Nothing moved. What are we going to do? The closet was next. A cardboard box sat near the back with a faded Home Depot logo stamped on the side. I pulled it out and crouched to check the contents. Inside was a toolbox that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. A broken level sat beside a pair of pliers with the grip half melted. An old, rusted hammer rested on top. This will work. I went back to the closet to take another look. A gap in the floorboards had opened where the toolbox had been. Pale light bled through the cracks. The smell coming off it was stronger than before, and it was thick with chemicals, something like bleach or melted plastic. It stung a little when I breathed it in. Do you hear that? At first I thought it was the pipes, but the sound didn't match anything I'd heard before. It was a rhythmic clicking in steady, gurgling intervals, almost like wet lips trying to keep time over a beat. I dropped down to the ground and pressed my eye to the gap in the floorboards. That's when the room beneath us opened up, and I knew we'd stepped into something we weren't meant to see. What is it? Todd snapped. What's happening? The main hall was massive, but everybody was gathered around the center. A row of pushed-together desks guarded 3 thick steel drums. A small group of young women in white moved between them in slow, deliberate circles. Each of them dragged long-handled ladles through the surface through pools of translucent orange liquid. The whole crowd watched them work in silence while the concoction bubbled like lava and melted cheese. Not sure, I muttered. Looks like they're lined up for something. A figure stepped into view from the furthest queue. I recognized the face. He was the same kid from earlier, the one who cracked his skull on the pavement. Something about the way he moved just seemed wrong. The bones in his legs bent at awkward angles. Each step was like watching a puppet try to figure out its strings. His face was pale and streaked with dried blood, but he didn't seem to mind the cuts and bruises. He just kept going, arms at his side, eyes ahead. This is weird, I muttered out loud. Now they're getting ready to eat. The teenager shuffled in front of the vats. He seemed to be the first of the townsfolk to be seen by the lunch ladies from hell. They swarmed him in a group. One of them looked him up and down. Another sniffed him by the collarbone. Apparently satisfied with the result, the 2 of them scurried out of the way, while a third forced the kid down to his knees in front of the bile. She lifted a utensil to his nose. She pinched his nostrils. She waited. After a moment, a pale white slug forced itself free. Oh my God! I covered my mouth to keep from vomiting. This is sick. The woman caught the thing in her dish before she walked toward a smaller drum at the back of the room. She lowered it inside carefully, like it was made of glass. The kid went limp. One of the others stepped in behind him and gently dunked his head into the orange slop. He screamed when the second slug emerged from the slime. Then he sobbed as it crawled across his mouth and up his nose. They're parasites, I muddled my words trying to explain. They're inside of them. The kid twitched, his eyes rolled back. For a second, I thought he was about to collapse again. Then, his whole body seized. He snapped upright and started laughing. It was a hysterical, panicked, frenzied sort of laughter. The type where you have to catch your breath in between. He bolted across the room and slammed his head into a wall. Then he bounced off and did it again and again. He dropped to his knees and stared at the blood on his hands. Then he licked them. Slowly, as if he was savoring the taste. Todd reached around me and pulled the hammer off the toolbox. I couldn't stop him. Everything happened too fast. There wasn't any time to react. He stepped past me and smacked the window with one clean smash. The glass cracked and blew apart. Shards bounced across the floor. I was still looking through the crack in the floorboards when the energy shifted. Every head in the hall below snapped toward me. Not toward the window. Not the noise. Me. Like they knew exactly where I was. Like they'd just been waiting for a reason. And then they started to run. The teenager was the fastest. He pushed the others out of the way as he dropped to all fours and sprinted to the door at the end of the long hallway. I got up and started to move myself. Todd was trying to force himself out of the window, but he didn't quite fit. His pants were torn where the jagged pieces bit deep into his legs. His shirt was covered in red. He twisted hard, trying to shove through, but the frame scraped him raw. He yelled back at me as footsteps rushed up the steps. Then he turned around. There was something evil in his eyes when he hit me. I slammed into the floor hard. My head bounced against the tile and everything got slow. My ears rang. My vision pulsed at the edges. I could still hear him moving somewhere above me. Todd. He was angry about something. The door burst open. The mob poured in. The man in pajamas spotted him first. Todd had one foot out the window, but the cuff of his khakis was caught on the radiator. He couldn't move. The big guy yanked him by the ankle and pulled him back inside. The rest of them screamed like animals. They clawed at his arms and dragged him across the floor. Todd kicked, he begged, he said he was sorry, he said he didn't mean to. They didn't care. They hauled him out the door and back down the stairs, still yelling, still pleading for me to come and save him. And then it was quiet again. I waited by the door for a few seconds, just long enough to know they weren't coming back. The screams, they only got worse. Todd's voice had turned hoarse and jagged, like he swallowed some sandpaper. There weren't any words to be heard anymore, just guttural moans. The mob loved it. They made these horrible little noises, snorts, gasps, something that almost sounded like applause. They were excited now, and that horrific fucking clicking sound didn't stop either. It only got louder. I stepped through the doorway and into the hall. My legs wobbled, my skull throbbed. The world tilted every few steps, but I didn't stop. I just walked. Down the steps, through the library, and out the front door. For a moment, I felt guilty. I really did. But then I thought about the hammer, and those stupid fucking khakis, and all of the horribly condescending moments that led to the one when that cowardly, selfish little asshole tried to sacrifice me so that he could survive. And then I just kept moving. The woods were cold and dark then. The early morning had given way to a gentle rain that slipped through the trees and clung to the branches. Mud sucked at my shoes. Branches scratched at my shoulders. I followed the same path we took in and ended up in the field that led to the parking lot. Our car was still parked at the back. I spotted the keys with the little white dice in the gravel where we left them, wet and smeared with blood. I picked them up, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I stared through the windshield for a while. Then I started the engine and drove away. That night, I reported everything to the police in my hometown. I felt safer there. I expected they'd ask me more questions, maybe even think I had something to do with it. Maybe I did. I still couldn't shake the guilt of leaving my coworker behind. Before long, the secretary returned and told me they had located Todd. They spoke to him on the phone, and he was a little shaken up, but alive and well. I couldn't believe it. 2 days later, a postcard arrived in the mail. Greetings from scenic White Valley. The Mariani family has lived in this country for generations. We were a loud and proud bunch from the boot. Everyone always stereotypes Italian immigrants as brutish thugs, or that we are all connected. Unfortunately, my family liked to live up to those stereotypes. From the moment we stepped off the boat, it seemed like we were fine-tuned to trouble. My great-grandfather got his start as a bootlegger, right on the tail end of Prohibition. Vincenzo the Wall Mariani, my grandfather, a respected capo in one of the 5 families. Which leads us to my father, Frank Sr., who never really had the temperament or fortitude for the life. A fact that Papa Vincenzo respected, all things considered. Still, it was different back then. He was expected to keep up appearances, make like he was grooming an heir. So, he and Dad came to an understanding. Dad would make small collections, drive some friends around on errands. It would all work out, as long as he didn't ask any questions. Dad wasn't stupid. He had some inkling about what was happening on those drives. This went on for a few years and ended somewhat abruptly. My father moved away and distanced himself from that part of the family. We rarely saw the black sheep, Mariani, unless it was for a wedding or a funeral. The last time I saw Papa Vincenzo was a few weeks ago at my cousin Vincent's funeral, actually. He went around the room shaking hands and offering condolences, gabbing with anyone who would indulge him. He and Dad said few words to each other, and it was then I decided I needed to get the full story of their fallout. That night I cornered him in the kitchen, asking him why he was so cold to his own father. I laid on the guilt heavy on him, but he scoffed at that. When I was your age, if I talked to my father like that, they would have found me in 7 different dumpsters, he exclaimed. That probably wasn't too far off from the truth. I urged him on, and he got quiet, dwelling on the past. Finally, he spoke up. Frank, did I ever tell you about some of the jobs I did for my old man? There was a grave tone to his voice. He went on to tell me about a few stories from his time in North Jersey. They fascinated me. Some of it sounded so outlandish. He told me about the first time he went on a collection run. He didn't have his own set of wheels yet, and Papa Vincenzo loved his son very much. but not so much as to let him drive his 1958 Cadillac. He ended up showing up at the brownstone of Polly Caruso, hat in hand, meekly asking he could use his car for the gig. While Polly was beside himself, smacking him across the head as he threw Dad his keys. Polly drove a ragged brown Aspen, a permanent dent in the hood from some drunken brawl down at Cindy's. They got in, and Polly pointed down the road, and they set off on his first collection run. Now for this first one, Dad reiterated, he didn't leave the car. They traveled all around town, sometimes circling stores 3 or 4 times before Polly had him slam on the brakes. He would calmly get out of the car and enter whatever bar or bakery they had parked themselves in front of. Dad would hear the ringing of a bell and some store owner loudly welcoming in Polly, who took in this wealth and good cheer with glee. It would often be a few minutes before he would come back out, tucking something into his pocket. He was all smiles with the owner when he would leave, sharing a laugh or a pat on the back with them. But the moment he sat his eyes back on the Aspen, his expression would stone over, those beady eyes of his long since losing their soul. Only once that day did a collection take long. It was their second to last stop of the day, a bait and tackle shop that had just opened up. Polly's face darkened more than usual as they pulled up, and he saw the owner twiddling his thumbs at the register. He pointed at him with such force, it was like he expected the owner to vaporize with a glare. "This gentleman," Polly explained, "is always short." Polly slammed the car door shut in a huff and made his way inside. Now Polly was not a very tall man. He was about 5'4" bit of a beer gut and had the face of a century-old bulldog. He also had the temper of one as well. Dad could see the shop owner's face explode in terror as Polly strode over to him, as he shot that shark-tooth grin at the man. He couldn't hear what they were saying. Polly was simply nodding as the man spun some yarn, gesturing to his register and the empty store around him. Polly seemed understanding and took the man by the shoulder and led him to the back. It was then my father noticed Polly had spun the closed sign around when he had entered. It was about half an hour before Polly emerged, like a ghoul hiding in the shadows. He came out of an alleyway, glancing up and down the street in a paranoid fashion, before waltzing back into the Aspen, huffing and puffing. Dad noticed Polly's knuckles were throbbing and raw but said nothing. "Nice enough guy, shame his business ain't taking off like he thought it would," Polly said, cutting into the tension in the air like a butcher swinging his cleaver. "Didn't see him come out of the back." Dad mumbled. Polly gave him the side eye. "I was helping him do some inventory in the back. He took a bad fall. Told him to take a day, ice his leg a little." Polly remarked casually. "I'm a helpful guy? You know that, right, Frankie?" Polly asked him, a deadpan look on his face. My dad sputtered and tried to reply, but Polly laughed, jabbing him in the gut playfully. "Hey, you're a good kid. Pull up to that butcher shop round the corner. I'll buy you a hero." And that was end of that. He never brought up the tackle shop after that. That shop would end up going under a few months later. Some of Polly's associates had come in and ransacked the place, taking everything but the Cooper wiring. He never heard about what happened to the owner, but he could imagine, and left it at that. Dad did well as a driver, having a few regulars who requested him specifically. They tipped big and treated him well, if for no other reason than he was the boss's son. Eventually, Father was able to afford his own set of wheels, red gaudy-looking Vega. That car was Dad's pride and joy and had very strict rules about it that he enforced on the wise guys. One of these rules was, no carpets. Before I could even ask, Dad explained the origin of that rule. One night, he got a call from Polly, a friendly but strained tone in his voice. He knew it was late, but he needed him to come pick him and his buddy up from some club in Newark. Dad knew by no not to argue, so he hopped in his car and headed to some sleazy nightclub. He went around back and saw Polly standing there with his buddy, Sal Valentine. Sal had the nickname Waddles due to a case of gout he had that got so bad he ended up having half his left foot amputated. Polly saw my dad pull up and reached for something behind his back, relaxing only when he saw who it was. Sal waddled up to the passenger side and got right in, reeking of cheap booze and cheaper women. "Hey Frankie boy, how's your rash?" he joked. You look good? You been hitting the gym? Important thing for a kid your age? Gotta stay in shape for the ladies, huh? He had a crazed look in his lazy eyes, but Dad met his gaze and held it. Though out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Polly lugging something behind the Vega and popping the trunk. I tell you, Frank, you got it easy being young. Whole life ahead of you. Some people don't know what they got till they lose it, you know. Ha ha. Sal was rambling now, and Polly overheard him, slamming the trunk and heading to the back seat, snapping his fingers. He flashed sad a smile as he came in. Heya, Frank. Sorry to disturb your beauty sleep there, but well, Waddles over here had a bit too much and lost his keys. Sal smiled sheepishly, grinding his teeth at the mention of his hated name. No problem, man. You guys heading home? Dad offered. Well, we need to make a quick stop first down by the docks. Down by the docks, huh? Dad grumbled as started the engine. Yeah, left some paperwork back there. Sal countered. Polly shot him a look and he snapped shut real quick. The drive over to the docks was unusually quiet. It was about 1 a.m., the roads devoid of travelers, and the cops had pretty much packed it in for the night. The radio droned on, playing some quiet melody that Dad couldn't quite place. He was so focused on that, he didn't hear the light thumping coming from the back. Polly heard it before him, and from the rear view he could see all color drain from his face. He heard a louder thump now, more deliberate. Dad raised his eyebrows. Besides him, Sal glanced out the window, ignoring the elephant in the trunk. What was that noise? He said, watching Polly in the rear view. He shrugged the question off. You see the game last night? O'Brien took a fucking header, huh? He said, all chummy. More thumping, as Sal shifted next to him. Lot of potholes on the road, Frankie. Gotta watch out, you'll ruin your suspension. He spoke. Polly looked like he wanted to strangle him. Against his better judgment, Dad pulled off to the side of the road. He could see Dock 55 in the distance, massive overhead cranes marking the promised land. The thumping became frantic now, panicked even. Polly threw up his hands as Sal got out of the car. What the heck is back there? Dad asked plainly. Nothing, old carpet, don't worry about it. Polly mumbled as Sal popped the trunk. A muffled voice cried out from the back as Sal began shushing insistently. Pretty chatty for a carpet, Dad remarked. There was a smacking sound from the back as the carpet began to cry out, a little less muffled now. Waddles, you limp-wristed fuck you, let me out of here right now or I'll... Waddles silenced the carpet with a solid left hook and gave him 3 more for good measure. The trunk slammed shut behind him, and Sal came back, wincing as he held his hand. Dad clucked his tongue and turned the radio off, facing Polly. Polly held the facade of a mean bastard, but his eyes sang a tragic tale of embarrassment and guilt, a rarity for a man like him. Does my father know you have Antonio Petriello in a carpet? He asked him, not a hint of fear in his voice as he stared down Polly. It would be prudent if he didn't, Polly finally admitted. My father simply nodded and pulled back onto the road. The docks were deserted. By design, of course, no one was dumb enough to loiter around Dock 55 after hours. It was an open secret that 55 was where Mariani family problems went to disappear. No questions asked, you just secured your luggage in a container marked with a red X, and in the morning a cleaner came in and ferried them out to sea. Dad sat in the car as Polly and Sal loaded up the carpet, never to be seen or spoken of again. Polly pulled him aside after the fact, apologizing profusely as he promised he wouldn't pull that stunt again. Polly produced a wad of hundreds out of thin air, successfully bribing my father to not utter a word of this to Vincenzo. Sal didn't say anything after the fact, though he did give the warehouse one smug look as he limped over back to the Vega. None of this would matter in the long run to my father, though a few days later he did find a few specks of blood in his trunk, and he spread the word to Paul. No carpets. Dad went on to say that he never saw that much of Waddles afterwards, and never did get a clear picture of what went on that night. He and Polly drifted apart, and a few weeks after the carpet incident, Sal up and vanished. He was never spoken of again, save for the occasional crass joke in his honor. The leading theory Dad had was Waddles was given up as a sacrificial lamb to appease the Petriello crew, who never did shut up about the missing Antonio. Such was life back then, you could lose yours casually at the drop of a hat. This was the par for the course things he dealt with, but in a hushed voice he explained things got weird at times. One time he was picking up two guys from a heist. Now I say heist like that because it was two schmucks who got the bright idea to hold up a truck bound for the Natural History Museum. They figured they would stop it outside of town, stuff the Vega with loot, and drive off into the sunset. It was a late Friday afternoon. The two schmucks sulked in the back of the Vega, stockings masking their adrenaline-spiked panic of what they were about to do. My father was bored with it. Wasn't his first heist, and really, he was just doing a favor for one of his regulars. Schmuck number one in the red tracksuit being the son of his regular. The truck came over the horizon, and Dad jerked the Vega forward, cutting it off. The schmucks jumped out of the car, guns drawn and at the ready. He watched as schmuck number two held up the driver, a black-bearded man who was more pot than belly, while schmuck one went behind it. It was taking a good while for him to come around the bend with the goods, and Dad was forced to hike up his own ski mask and investigate. He came around back and saw John the schmuck standing there, confused as all hell, crowbar in one hand and an empty sack in the other. It turns out the two criminal masterminds failed to vet what would actually be on the truck. They heard history and thought old paintings and fabled jewels. The truck was filled to the brim with ancient Egyptian artifacts and larger-than-life stone statues of animals and pharaohs past. John was standing in front of an open shipping crate, the gold-plated death mask of an old king staring up at him with painted eyes. Dad told him to grab something and let's go. John reached into the crate and filled it with something. The ill-fated heisters made their getaway in the Vega, speeding off into the distance towards safe harbor. John sat in the back, rummaging through the sack. He had grabbed some animal-headed pots and a statue of Bastet. No one in their circle really had any clue how to move. My dad's regular was embarrassed, and the idiots laid low as they sat on their stolen goods. The rest of this my dad overheard through various sources and hushed conversations. John the schmuck kept the Bastet statue, hung it over his mantle. That day forward, every night a cat would creep up to his window and stare at him. He began having vivid nightmares of the dead rising from the grave, wrapping him in gauze and dragging him to hell to face judgment. John became jumpy and flaky, staying cooped up in his room rather than risk his bizarre dreams becoming reality. He would see Black Cat, eyes yellow and hungry, gaze upon him from his bedroom window. He chased it off at first, but it just kept coming back. His father had enough of his foolishness and ordered some guys up to his apartment to drag him out of the house and get some air.